Welcome to the Lift Your Story podcast with guest Bill Hobson, President and CEO of Hobson Media. Hi, everyone. I am Lorianne. I am that gal from Mississauga, Ontario, Canada, and I'm with...
I am that guy. I am Roy Miller from Dallas, Texas. Welcome to our Lift Your Story podcast.
So in this episode, we welcome Bill Hobson, and he's the President and CEO of HobsonMedia.com. Thanks for being here.
Hey, thank you for the invitation. And I feel like I've gone international now. So, I've gotten a promotion today.
Yeah, we crossed the border into Canada.
Right. In my state of Michigan, that's been a difficult thing to do recently. So now we've figured it out.
Well, Bill, I see, and I like your tagline, we tell your story. So, you kind of go right along with us because that's what we try to do, is lift people's stories. So you work with nonprofits, ministries, in fundraising, the way I see it, correct?
Yeah, that's part of it. We really want to help with their messaging and communications because so many of these places, these ministries that are making eternal differences in the lives of the people they serve, so many of them are really good at what they do, but they're not as good at telling their story. Well, the clients that we work with, the ministries that we partner with, don't receive taxpayer support. They are dependent upon the kindness, the generosity of people who have compassionate hearts. Excuse me. So we help to kind of present the stories of changed lives in a way that hopefully will touch the hearts of a donor. And that's where that motto of "we tell your story" comes from. And over the course of, my goodness, almost 30 years, I've had the privilege of working with, in a lot of cases, homeless shelters, youth ministries, and other ministries that have been established to help people who are in some degree of distress. And I learned right from the early stages of getting involved in all of this, that those people who are in need of help are not that different from everybody else. They are a few decisions in the wrong way from having everything put together, but those decisions didn't happen the way, if you could redo them, if you could have a mulligan and start over again. And there are some powerful stories to share, some of which hit very close to home early on, and we'll get into that in the moments ahead. And some of which still blow me away when I sit down across the table or at a Zoom window and interview that mother of four who's at the rescue mission and never dreamed she would need that kind of help, or the addict who at the age of 13 was introduced to some sort of a substance that never let go of him or her. And the stories just keep on going and going. But on the other end of it, it's so cool when you can see the after picture, and that is when somebody gets those pieces put back together. It's just very powerful.
Beautiful.
Wow. So when you go in to work with somebody, trying to get their story so you can tell it, how hard is that for you to do?
Well, thankfully, when I work with a ministry organization, I will defer to them. I have this very firm belief that I should never enter into your premises pretending to know your ministry better than you do. Mm-hmm. And we've worked with a number of ministries for a couple of decades now, and we still go in deferring to their expertise because they are the ones who are on the ground every single day addressing the needs of those who come through the door. Let me give you a couple of examples. At the rescue mission in Flint, Michigan, it's called Carriage Town Ministries. Now, some of your listeners may have heard of Flint, Michigan because of the lead poisoning in the water, General Motors evacuating the town, and all of these traumatic things that have transpired over the years. Well, in many cases, Carriage Town Ministries' front door is the place these folks go when they're desperate, when they have nothing else to turn to. Maybe they've burned all of their bridges. And it's entirely possible for me to go to Carriage Town and just go up to a random person and say, "Hey, could we tell your story?" But they don't know me. And that's a breach of a personal space because they feel safe at the rescue mission. And so I love to work with the staff of the mission, those who deal with those folks on a daily basis, and say, is there anybody here that you think is ready to share part of their story? And I enjoy it so much. And I'll give you a little bit of background. A million years ago, I had hair at this point. So this is a while ago. I was working at Fox Television, and I decided to leave there. I was tired of the programming and the things that I was being asked to represent. And so I actually left on purpose and went to work at this rescue mission that I'm telling you about at Carriage Town Ministries. I was their development director, had never even been there before. Even though my church had served on a regular basis, I had not gone. Within the first week of me on staff at the mission, as I'm still trying to learn what this whole world of development even means and what it looks like, I was walking in through the courtyard one morning, and the courtyard used to be, it's different now, but it used to be a place where people would just kind of gather and hang out. I'm walking through because that's where the main entrance was to the building, and I hear this man yell, "Hobson." And I froze. I just froze in my tracks. And now I had spent the prior 10 years on television, so it wasn't impossible for somebody to maybe recognize me from that market because that's where I was on TV. And I turned and looked, and he said, "You don't know who I am, do you?" And I said, "I'm really sorry. I'm terrible with names." You know, I was struck silent almost by this odd exchange. And then he told me his name, and he was my 8th grade football coach. And I had no idea who this person was because it was a shriveled version of the guy who used to make me run laps and beat me over the helmet with a ring of keys when I was blocking wrong and all those things. And he looked like a shell of himself. And it just jarred me to my core because I remembered this burly, not a very good football coach, but this big guy that was an authority figure. And here he was staying at the mission because of a series of decisions that he had made. And it was the first moment where I really grasped the reality that the people who are in the greatest need for assistance in our world are often people that are our neighbors. They might be our cousins, our uncles, our brothers, our parents, our children. And we would do well to remember that we're not all that special just because we don't have to sleep at the rescue mission tonight. And I could go on and on about his particular story, but there are so many others that have reminded me over the years of what a privilege it is to be able to come alongside organizations that are super, super good at what they do, but need some help conveying that to their supporters.
Wow.
Wow.
I got goosebumps through that story.
Yeah, really.
Yeah.
That had to be a very emotional experience.
It was, and it was exacerbated a couple weeks later. I came into the mission on a Monday, and I noticed that some of the staff, they were just kind of down. They were not talking to me as they normally do, like, "Hey, good morning," and "Happy Monday," and "Have a donut," or whatever. I said, "What's going on?" And they said, "Well, did you hear about Jim?" And that was the name of the coach. "No." They said, "Well, he died over the weekend." I'm like, "What? How in the world did this happen?" And he had taken his van, he had a van, and he went to a park nearby. And it's a little fuzzy, but somehow he decided to cook hot dogs on a grill inside the van without opening up the van, which perhaps was intentional. I don't really know. And he was dead. And I just sat there just stunned because first of all, because of his place as an authority figure from decades prior, you never really think of those people as being mortal, right? And then you never think you're going to walk in on a Monday and just hear that he had passed. And so over the years, moments like this have convinced me how special those men and women are that work in the programs, the recovery programs, the long-term residence programs at the missions and at the different ministries, because these people, these precious men and women have said to the Lord, they've said to themselves, "You know what? I'm going to put myself out there. I'm going to make my heart accessible to people, even though I'm probably going to get kicked in the teeth repeatedly. There's not a homeless shelter. There's not a teen ministry. There's not a youth camp in the world that has a 100% success rate. And so in those moments when you don't see somebody follow through on reorganizing and kind of putting life back together again, it's pretty devastating. And so I'm not going to pretend to be the person who got hurt the most over the years, but that was my first time where I was like, oh my goodness, this is for real. This is truly life and death. And so I better really hone in and take all of this even more seriously than I was thinking to start with. And so I never enter into a conversation now with anybody that I don't really hone in, shut the phone off, block my attention fully in, because in many cases, Lorianne and Roy, in many cases, that person hasn't had someone pay attention to them and say, you matter, maybe in their entire lives. And what a difference it makes when you just say to somebody, I am listening to you. And by the way, I think you matter. I think your story is important. I think God loves you and has a plan for you, never forgot about you. You thought he did, but he didn't, because he made you in his image. And to be able to see that kind of that glow come on that person just because somebody cared and told their story, to me, that's just, it's just so powerful.
So I like part of your story, Sir Roy, but when I was reading about that, you were on television commercials.
Yes.
And that's where you started. I worked for an auto dealership, so I thought, oh, there you go. I've got something in common with you.
Lorianne.
How was that?
Oh, little Billy Hobson was terrible on television. But my dad, who is still with us, but he's a retired auto dealer, Ford dealer, he wanted myself and my sister in his commercials because he thought that would be fun for us. And it was fun for us, but they were so bad. And he didn't know any better. And the advertising agency that handled the production, all they wanted to make sure of was that Mr. Hobson was happy, because if he's happy, then he's spending money with them, right? So they would do anything. And we found recently some of these VHS tapes of my sister and I, and they need to be erased and buried and burned. And we need to sign non-disclosure agreements or something, because they really were embarrassing. However, that experience is also what sparked my path towards being a communicator, a storyteller, a speaker, a TV host, a radio host, whatever, all of those things. And I can still remember the day when I was roughly 16 or 17, I walked into my dad's office at the dealership and he said, I got a question for you. Okay. Do you want them? I said, do I want what? Do you want the dealerships? I'm like, I'm 16 or 17. All I want is the key to the vending machine. And he was getting ready to retire, and he wanted to know if he should hang on for a while and teach me and transition me into it. And the truth is, I love my dad. He's my biggest cheerleader. He really is. I didn't want anything to do with that business because he was there for like 17 hours a day. And I thought, I don't want to do that. I want to go play golf. So I was kind of spoiled, but it was also a moment. And I love this as it applies to fathers and mothers listening to you right now. He could have crushed me right then. He could have easily said, how dare you? I've built this for you, this empire for you. Could get it. And instead he's like, hey, you do what the Lord's calling you to do, and I'll be there for you. And he helped build one of my first studios in a house that we used to live in. He has, he sometimes gets the details wrong these days, but it's always wrong on the good side. Like suddenly I'm the most important broadcaster in the world, even though we all know better. And he still is asking frequent questions about how's it going? How's the TV show? I do a TV show about golf and great destinations around the world. Where are you going next? And what's it like? And so those commercials that started way back when, we'd never want them to see the light of day again, but I will always be thankful that they happened because they really did spur the direction that I took. And I think that that's one of the things that perhaps the Lord has given me. That gift is just communication and being able to relate to an audience in whatever form that is.
Even if they're really horrible, they probably still go viral because they're so horrible.
No, they would go viral today. Yes, I'm so glad there was no social media back then.
Lorianne, he's a TikTok influencer in the making.
And he's got me really curious now. I want to see them. That's
I know.
bad. It's not.
Yeah, you're not going to. It's not going to happen. Sorry.
Oh, but that's a great story about your dad. That he was behind you. He wasn't pressuring you. He was, there to encourage you to do what was right for you, not what he thought he wanted you to do.
Yeah, and my mom's part of that too. And here's the kicker to all of it. I'm adopted. I was adopted when I was 6 weeks old by Bill and Mary Hobson out of an adoption agency in Detroit. I tell people I closed it down because it doesn't exist anymore. And so many times over my life, and I'm 53 now, so many times throughout my life, my dad would say to me very directly, your mother and I would feel terrible if we kept you from something better. And I was like, I don't even know what you're talking about. You pulled me out of an adoption agency when I was an infant, and you have blessed me with a life of faith and of love and of family. We're not perfect, but we are a family. We get along. We all like each other and grandkids, all this stuff. And I said, I can't imagine anything that the Lord would have done anything else differently that would have somehow made my life better. I'm so grateful. But they're thoughtful people. And while we all have our quirks, and now that they're in their early 80s, the quirks are rather adventurous at times. I will forever be grateful for the love and support of my family. And it also, by the way, makes me even more aware and more conscious of the people that I'm interviewing in the ministry settings who don't have that background. And, they didn't have a father that maybe was even there. And if so, would have been better off had he not been there, depending on how that relationship went and if there was abuse and all that. And so these ministries have the opportunity to introduce their guests to the perfect Heavenly Father and try to build that distinction between, we know that the concept of a dad isn't very positive for you, but can we introduce you to a direction that might change that? And so to play a small part in that is really one of my favorite things in life. And then a few years ago, we launched a podcast called The Big Impact, which is somewhat like what you're doing on Lift Your Story, which is just to tell positive and inspiring stories. In fact, this morning, my conversation with the author Karen Kingsbury went up on our podcast. And, for my mom, that was a big deal. She's like, you have Karen Kingsbury? I'm like, yes. But we are able to connect with people from all walks of life who have positive, powerful stories to share. And in our culture, now, Lorianne, I know it's perfect there in Canada, but here in America, we've got a few issues, especially when it comes to negativity and tearing each other down. So it's our kind of small effort to try and say, hey, at least for like 45 minutes a week, if you want to turn off the garbage and just be fed with encouragement, we'd love to have you check out The Big Impact.
Yes, and here in Canada, my father, who, by the way, turns 89 today.
Nice.
His birthday. But in our, my mom says he's watching the Trump channel. We've got CNN all the time, so I know everything that's going on states through their eyes.
Yeah.
But they don't watch a lot of Canadian news, so that's how boring we are.
Yeah, it's a strange time to be alive, isn't it?
Oh yeah.
Yeah, it is. Bill, we kind of feel like that no matter who you are, you have a story that people want to hear.
Yeah.
You may not think so, but we've talked to a lot of people. We started out in one direction, and we found out that they had a whole different thing that was a lot more interesting. But everybody has something they can contribute, that the world wants to hear, we think.
I agree. And I've run into those surprises so many times. My favorite way actually to enter into an interview, other than having the name of the person and maybe one sentence of background. I don't want any other information. I want to discover it as we go. That's a conversation. Otherwise, it's a junior high play where you're reading a script. You guys have, I'm sure, interviewed authors that are represented by publicity agents before, and they often will send you in advance a list of questions. I just throw that right in the garbage. And that's what I did with Karen Kingsbury. Not that she was fantastic, don't get me wrong, but I don't need somebody to tell me how to ask questions, because I'm trying to treat it as if we're sitting over breakfast. We're just talking. How's life? What's happening? What's going on in your world? I don't want it to be like a Joe Biden press conference where they're all scripted out and he knows in what order he's going to call on people. I can't stand that. It's not real. And he's not the only president, but he's the current president. He's not the only one who's done that, I should say.
Yeah.
So save your letters and emails. But the world of orchestrated conversation is not my world. I just want to, like we are right now, I just want to chat and discover the things that fuel our passion. You're right, Roy. Everybody has a story. And in so many cases, people have never thought of it in that way. They think they don't matter, but they do matter. And we as a culture, I was wrestling with this question because I think we as a culture have been beaten down by social media more than we've been lifted up by social media. And I was kind of wondering the other day if we would all be better off had social media never been invented. And I started doing some pros and cons. We'd miss out on a lot of recipes. I probably wouldn't see as many puppy pictures and, nephew birthday and kindergarten graduation like that was ever a thing, pictures and all those, and on, those connections with friends and family. But on the other side of it, I think the negatives are pretty strong. And I think they've contributed to a general malaise of our culture. And I'm going to give you one example. I had lunch yesterday with a dear friend. He and his wife have adopted 5 children. They have 5 of their own. The 5 that they've adopted are now in their early teens, and they're quite a handful because they came with some pre-existing conditions due to the addictions of their birth mom. They're not from the same birth mom. These are 5 kids that were unrelated. And I say that because one of them she's 15, one of the children, and through social media has devastated the family. I guess that's the most general way I can put it. And now has such an addiction to it that if the phone is removed and that kind of thing, there's actual violence that takes place within this home from the most peaceful, loving couple that you would ever want to meet. I mean, you're not going to adopt 5 kids if you don't have a kind heart. I just can't imagine that same thing would be happening absent the social media connections and all the apps that many of which we've never heard of, but kids know about. And so my pastor said a few weeks ago that we are by far the most technologically advanced and connected society in the history of the world. And we are also the most lonely. And I thought that was a powerful statement, especially among young people. And when I talked to my friend at lunch yesterday, I said, are you able to they need to get a place for her. She has some schizophrenia and something. They need to get some serious inpatient care for her. And they were talking with a doctor who had just attended a global conference and was told in that global conference that in the United States of America, there is not one available bed in a residential treatment facility for young people. Not one. Because since the pandemic, as life has been turned upside down for young people, everything's been canceled, all their traditions, all the things, they've isolated, and now they're a mess because of it. And so, we want to lift your story. We want to talk about the big impact. We can't forget the young people in all of this, because if they're left behind, these are the leaders of tomorrow. These are the next folks that are going to come along and make decisions for us. And right now, they're having a difficult time making decisions for themselves. And so that's one of the ministries we work with is a teen ministry, and some powerful stories are coming out of that as well.
It's an interesting story that goes along with that too, because my daughter and I were having that conversation. And if I get really teary-eyed, I excuse myself ahead of time. But where I was saying, like, she's struggling, just talking about loneliness, friendship, and that. And I said, I'm sorry that you were born in the world of technology, because at the age of 2, she was on a computer playing, doing that. I mean, she knew better than I sometimes to do things. And I said, at least I said, in the good old days, we didn't have that. She goes, that's my problem, Mom. I don't have the good old days.
That's
And
very
it's
true.
like we talk about that. We posted as boomers all over the place, like where we were outside on bikes, and we kept in touch through letters and everything with our friends. Even if we moved, we kept writing to them. There's a disconnect, I think, with technology that wasn't there before. I mean, I'm sure there was some disconnect. I'm not saying it wasn't all there, but I'm saying I think it's a bigger issue now.
You're so right. And let's, not to sound like the old guy yelling at you to get off my lawn and how I used to walk to school uphill both ways in the snow with a bear chasing me.
Yeah.
But I do want to kind of take us back in time to perhaps, let's go to when I was 15, which today's 15-year-old is caught up in the midst of all of this, trying to keep up and see how many likes the picture will get and body image and all that stuff. I'm 15, and if I was irritated with something, my friends and I would just talk about it while we were playing baseball in a field somewhere. What's happening now, and there's a wonderful ministry called Crossroads Farm where they deal with this day after day after day. What's happening now is that young people are retreating to their devices, and they are posting their raw feelings to anybody, and then they're crushed when some inevitably negative responses come back. So you're offering your heart, your soul, and your pain to people you've never met who are hiding behind a keyboard, but for some reason you're giving them permission to impact how you feel. I don't understand that. There's a saying that so-and-so is living rent-free in your head. My mantra is, well, start charging them something. Stop giving away the real estate for nothing. It's time to put a price tag on what gets into your head and into your heart. Young people are really, really wrestling with that. And if it isn't addressed kind of in that age span, I don't know if it carries through till they're 20 or 30, but I could introduce you to a number of 30-year-olds who have no clue how to handle difficulties, because it's all related to the feedback they're getting from strangers. I don't know about the two of you, but I can't recall the last time I really cared what a stranger had to say about me.
Yeah, me either. Even when I was a teenager, I could care less.
Yeah.
But that's one thing a lot of people do, even before social media. I was saying that to my daughter again, we chat a lot. And I said, I used to have that problem. I wanted to make everybody like me. And if somebody didn't like me, I worked really hard to try and get them to like me. Yeah. And then now, like, I guess I probably was in my late 30s before that went away, but I lived through that for that long. Now it's not that, if somebody doesn't like me, I'll show that, hey, I'm not that bad. I'm not that person you think I am. But if you continue not to like me, I don't care. It's not like I don't go, see what I'm saying? Like, it's not like I'm trying to get their approval, but some people judge you without knowing you. And that I try to overcome. But other than that, if they choose not to like me, I'm better off.
We interviewed a counselor, and she said a lot of the problem now is parents are trying to protect their kids so much that they don't want them to have any kind of negative effect, anything like that. Well, then they grow up and they can't deal with that. Any kind of adversity, they can't deal with it because they've never had it. They've been protected from it.
Well, we've been bubble wrapping our children for the last decade plus. I can remember as a 4th grader, my mom taught in the same school where I was a student. And so you did not want to get in trouble in school, because that would make its way down the hall, and then it would make its way home. And that was not going to be a pretty picture. And I remember one time we were messing around in the playground, and I got in trouble, and the playground lady, she grabbed me by the collar, and she was walking me down to the principal's office. And I began negotiating like I was part of the presidential cabinet trying to get a deal through, because I knew that the moment we hit the principal's door, I was toast. So I'm negotiating like crazy as we're coming into the building, then down there. I remember it was down this long hallway, then over this way, and then one more hallway. And if we got to that last hallway, then it was going to go from that office down to Mrs. Hobson's room at the other end. And that was going to be a nuclear disaster. And I can still recall this lady softening as we went. And then we got right to the door of the main school office. And she's like, do you promise never to do it again? And I'm like, yeah, I'll promise anything. Yeah, whatever. And so she let me go. If that same scenario happens today, I don't think the playground lady is sure that the parents will side with the authority. I think what's happening more and more often is they're siding with the kids and they're lawyering up. How dare you pull my son by the collar?
Right, exactly.
And it's
You're
backwards.
exactly
It's very backwards, but it's also the residual of a parental generation that was coddled and told everything you do is fine. It's your truth. It's your truth. And if your truth is your truth, then you just follow your truth. Sorry, folks, anybody out there who believes in scripture or has a degree of faith at all realizes that if I got to write all of my own rules, this place would be a bigger mess than it is. So there has to be the truth upon which we center our lives. And whether you want to dive deeply into scripture or just subscribe to the golden rule, do unto others as you would have them do unto you. By the way, we hear that twisted a lot, especially from morons in Congress. Do unto others as they do unto you. Not what it says. It says, do unto others as you would have them or as you wish they would do unto you. That's a very key distinction in that. And it's time for us to start living that out, perhaps even more obviously these days, because it's in short supply.
Yeah. Bill, how can our listeners reach out to you?
We would love to hear from you. Our primary way to do that is at hobsonmedia.com, and that's where you can see all of our podcasts listed, and there's a contact us page. We'd love to hear from you. We're on Facebook and Twitter and all those things. Just real quickly, let me just push you towards three different projects that we're doing, and they may be of interest to your listeners. Number one, I mentioned it earlier, The Big Impact. Every Wednesday, a new episode comes out of an inspiring story. We also put the videos up on our website at bigimpactradio.com. However, our most listened to podcast is called Marriage Talk. Marriage Talk is, I'm not the expert. I am the facilitator, and we have a licensed therapist and counselor who answers questions of our listeners, and that's available at marriagetalk.com. And then our third one is kind of a fun one. It's for sports fans. It's called Church Pew Sports, where pastors talk sports and life. And we have a group of pastors that they change every week from all over the country. Just recorded one yesterday with a pastor from Seattle and one from my church and the voice of the Michigan Wolverines football team, because there's a big Michigan State game this weekend. We just talk sports and have fun without swearing. It's possible to do, believe it or not. And so that's called Church Pew Sports. And if you're in the podcast world these days, folks, as you're listening to Lift Your Story, add a few more to your library. Check them out. If you don't like them, you just delete them. They didn't cost you anything. But if you do, we'd love it if you'd subscribe and help spread the word.
Great. Thank you so much. It's wonderful. It's great having you as a guest.
Yeah, it was a real pleasure.
Yes.
Well, I appreciate the invitation. And as much as I bemoan social media and all things internet, were it not for internet, we would not have met each other. So thanks for connecting. And anytime you need a guy to come on and babble for a half hour, let me know.
Great. Really appreciate it.
Thank you. Goodbye.